want to be?
All right, go ahead.
All right. Welcome, everybody. This is the August 14th edition of the Oconee County Conservation Bank meeting. We'll bring this meeting to order, and we've got a lot to get through today, so I'm going to try and keep things moving. Obviously, we appreciate everybody's input as we go through, so if you have questions or comments, don't hesitate to chime in. First thing to start with is approval of minutes from the June 5th meeting. Do we have any questions, comments, or motion regarding those minutes?
Motion to approve the minutes.
I second.
All right. Any opposed? All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Seeing that we have all in favor, that we'll approve those minutes from June 5th meeting. Next item on the agenda is the treasurer's reports from May and July 2018. And I think we did have all these presented to us in advance as well. We have any discussion, comment, or a motion about those treasurer's reports for those 2 months?
I make a motion to approve them.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Seeing everybody in favor, we'll approve those since those were basically static. We didn't have any pluses or minuses. Those are pretty straightforward. And that brings us to the discussion items down here. Number 4 on our agenda for today. The first bullet point is the continued discussion regarding alternate funding sources. And I think you all remember, based on our last discussion, there is some medium and long-term desire to go ahead and present a request to the Oconee County Council, but as a preliminary step, we are looking to get garner support in the form of letters. Anybody able to get some signed letters of support and bring with them today?
I have 6.
All right, thank you, Fran.
Just a couple.
All right, thank you, Marvin, appreciate that.
And I could not find them this morning, but I have several out, so
Okay.
I can get them. Katie, can we use the fax number if somebody wants to fax a letter to you?
It's probably better if they can,
Okay.
or they can drop it off.
Or I can gather and bring them, but I'll do that.
Katie, as the last batch, I put the owner on the back, or the person that signed, because you can't read the writing too well.
Okay. And I've got plenty of them here with their names and addresses on the front as well. I don't want to misspeak, Katie, but I think if anybody ends up getting letters, I can drop them off at the office here too. If you guys forwarded them to me, I can forward them to Katie. But let's continue to do that. I think this is probably going to put us over 30 plus for just this meeting, plus what Fran brought last meeting. And so let's continue to push forward on that. The more we get, the better it is in terms of just documenting we have support. I don't think there's any doubt that we've got plenty of folks in the community who do support the cause, but from the council's perspective, they want to see that or sort of feel that in their hands in some regard. So I think that's helpful. I think it's also worth saying that, when you're asking a family to support it, it's okay to have, for example, a husband and wife sign one. They're both individuals. They can both support it individually. If you know business owners, somebody could sign it individually and on behalf of their business. These are two separate entities. So be a little creative. We're not trying to manipulate things, but I think that's accurate also if there's somebody who wants to support it in more than one capacity. I have had some people who sign some statement of interest forms who actually don't reside in Oconee County, but they have second homes here or they vacation here, so that's also fine. Obviously, a lot of these, the majority are going to be from Oconee County, but the council might be interested to know that there are visitors and tourists or folks with second or third homes that also support what we're going to be proposing. So between now and the next meeting, continue to work on that. I'll try to send out a reminder so we can continue to do that. There's no magic number per se that I have in mind or that I think we need to have in mind, but it is sort of a more is better kind of thing. So continue to be creative and work on that. If you are in front of a group, if you're with, any sort of interest group that you're together with, consider whether it would be appropriate just to bring it up. I mean, it doesn't take much at all to bring, 5 or 10 copies of this with you and just have people ready for it to sign. Most of the people I've talked to in the area and my circles are really ready to sign it, and their next question is, well, do you have a sample for me or something? So just come prepared, but appreciate everybody doing it so far and keep working on it.
Can we get a list of the people that have signed
Yes,
the
that's
letters so we
Yeah.
I don't want to ask people multiple times. So.
Yeah, I will put together something.
Right. Thank you, Katie.
Thanks, Katie. That's great. Any other thoughts or questions on that?
Like, say, in light of time management now, I would like to maybe meet with you or someone that you would recommend. I just have a couple of questions in general about the letter.
Sure.
And I am determined to get some signatures,
Sure.
but I would like to be informed in the event
course.
that I have questions, and I do have a couple of questions about it that may come up, so possibly sometime and not now.
Sure, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely, and Ernie, before we go here, I can give you my number, and we can talk about
No
this, because
problem.
the letter and the overall idea is premised on the last year to 2 years worth of just discussion about the way we want to structure that, so I totally understand wanting to be informed when you present that to folks.
Thank you.
Absolutely.
I had a request the last time, and I'd like to bring it up again.
Mhm.
Several people ask, well, what do we do with recycling? Do we have bins or what?
In Oconee County?
Yeah.
It depends on a few different factors. I'm not an expert here, Fran. I think that's something that we could explore in more detail. There is is it the solid waste department that deals with that in Oconee County? Is that
Yeah.
what it's called?
Solid waste.
So they would be able to provide all that information, Fran. But suffice to say, it does depend whether you're in one of the municipal areas or not. So the towns have different programs than the county at large. The county at large, of course, has the actual recycling centers where people would drop these off. Now, that wouldn't change. I mean, if we request that the county fund us in part based on recycling revenues, if we go forward with that, that wouldn't be suggesting that we would somehow all be getting bins and collecting recycling. That would be basically doing things to encourage people to recycle using the current system that are not doing it now, or perhaps that are under recycling. And so that would really be more the impetus than designing a new recycling system, if that's what, if that's sort of what the question.
Folks like COBA might be able to say, and if you recycle, you're helping to fund
Correct.
Conservation Bank.
Absolutely. I mean, it provides another incentive for folks to do it, and it provides an incentive for folks who support conservation to sort of rally folks around them, businesses and individuals, to do recycling that they may not otherwise do. So,
Folks want something where employees or whatever can just drop their cans or plastic bottles or whatever. So we do need some kind of bins. Will we be asking the county for those?
I don't know. That's something we could certainly talk about. I mean, if your suggestion is actually looking for funding to provide bins to businesses, I think it's a bigger issue than that, because what you'd really be talking about at that point is not only getting bins, but having some sort of collection at the businesses. And that entails human effort and lots of time and investment and money. I'm not sure the county would likely go for that. Now, if there was a volunteer group that wanted to supply the bins and retrieve them on a weekly basis, I think it, I guess theoretically could be done. It would be a big commitment to do something like that, though.
So you're thinking more of an increase in the amount recycled at the recycling centers?
Yeah, primarily, that's right. That's right. There would be some low-hanging fruit, and one potential for discussion would be ways you can improve that system. That wouldn't be maybe the initial right off the bat focus, but it certainly could be medium and long term. How do we help increase that system? I'm certain that solid waste and the folks at Oconee County have thought about that a lot, because from their perspective, just very financially oriented, for everything they don't recycle, we have to pay to get shipped to Georgia and pay for the disposal of it. So there's already an incentive for them to do that. It doesn't mean that it's necessarily the best it can be, though. So certainly there's more opportunities there. Any other thoughts or discussion on that? I'm going to continue to talk to a few sources I have here at the county to see what the best timing would be for us to present such a request and what that timeline looks like. And I'll obviously keep everybody informed what I hear about that. Okay, with that said, one of the next discussion items is the scoring for the Natural Land Trust property. This is the 53-acre property that we had an application submitted by Natural Land Trust. It was submitted during our application period, and now we're sort of in the scoring period, and so now it would be an appropriate time to just walk through the scoring. Did everybody have a chance to kind of review and score that between the last meeting and this one? Okay. The last time we did this, I just sort of guided the discussion, I think, just by walking through each of the categories and trying to come up with a group consensus on that. You know, with that being said, nothing I write down in terms of my score has any more weight than anybody else does. So my goal would be just to garner consensus. Are you all still okay with that if I just kind of walk through that?
Please.
Okay. And so with that being said, there are two main sections. The first one is conservation and criteria, and there's obviously different sections for each of those. The first one was environmental sensitivity. And if we look at that environmental sensitivity category, we can walk through each of these subcategories, if you will, for which there are points awarded or not. And so if I'm looking at the top there, the first one I see in mine is where it says wetlands. Does everybody see that? Mm-hmm. Okay, so starting with that and going down, for wetlands, I didn't see that there was any wetlands on the property, so I didn't award points there. You guys stop me if you guys have a, you know, a contradictory thought there. I certainly could miss something.
And the application says no, it does not contain.
Okay, yeah, and that's where I got a lot of this language. And the application, for what it's worth, does try to track this, which is helpful. USGS Blue Line Streams and Lakes, I did see that that was indicated on the application, so there were 5 points there. Mm-hmm. Adjacent to water classified as any of those three high-quality waters. I did not see that in their application, so I didn't see any 5 points there. Presence of habitat suitable for threatened or endangered species. I did award 5 points there. It seemed to be supported in the application. Presence of or habitat suitable for native wildlife species, I think undoubtedly there was 5 points there. And then presence of special concentrated biodiversity, did not see that in the application, so I did not award there. And then a unique geologic or natural feature, I did not see that there. And so the three in this area that did receive points under my review, and you all tell me if you're different, was the blue line streams and lakes for 5 points, the presence of habitat for threatened or endangered species, 5 points, and the presence of habitat for native wildlife species for 5 points, which was a total of 15. Did anybody have a different?
I did. I had a different one for the blue line, and I'm wondering, is that 5 points if it's there? Is there a continuum?
In this particular section, it's a yes or no. There is some sections of this which are a continuum, but this one is just kind of a check the box yes or no. And there was a whole discussion about that a long time ago.
Okay.
Yeah.
Any other thought or discussion on that section, that category for environmental sensitivity? If there's not any objection to that, the total for that section would have been 15 points. Okay. The next section is percentage of property sharing a boundary with protected land. Based on the application, that was 1 to 25%, which yields a score of 4 points for that category. I think that's fairly straightforward. Any questions, comment about that? And then the next section is historic cultural features. And I kind of goofed this up here originally because it allows, if you look at the top, it says allow points for one category, if any. And so the maximum points for that section is 5 points, because this may have, likely would have qualified for more than one 5 point qualification here. the one that I ended up just putting the 5 points under, although I think it could have been 2, because there's the historic or prehistoric structures, which you could have given it to. It was the bottom one I thought was most clear, though, a historic or prehistoric site, that I gave 5 points for, because clearly this is essentially what this land is, a historic site.
Just within the last month, I've read The Road to Guilford Courthouse and Partisans in Redcoats, both of which were about the Revolutionary War. An amazing amount of which happened in South Carolina. I get chill bumps just reading. And this section in here that listed the folks gathering to go against the Cherokee, there were a bunch of young lieutenants in there. The Swamp Fox, Andrew Pickens, Montgomery, those guys carried the weight during the Revolution. I want to go up there and roll around in the dirt and just get some of the essence, because it's just mind-boggling, the people that camped out there. That were traipsing around, and that's wild. So yeah, that's I think that's an overwhelming thing in my view.
Okay, so under the category, again, the most we can give is 5 points. I think there's no question that qualifies for 5 points under that historic cultural feature. Any comment or question on that? Next section, again, pretty straightforward. Prime or statewide important soil types. In the application, it says that we do not meet that 50% threshold, so there would not be points awarded under that section. I think that's pretty straightforward there. Actively farmed, the next section, also, there wouldn't be points awarded under this section. This is not an actively farmed site.
What about tree farming?
That's a good question.
Is that is actively tree farmed or has been?
And so,
I'm not sure if that qualifies.
that's a good question, I think.
In the application, it says current landowner is not an agriculture entity. However, previous landowner has a history of farming site.
Yeah. So basically, to get points under this, it's either IRS form supplied, which of course was not done, but documentation of selling and or growing agricultural products in Oconee County for the previous 2 years. So that's what would have had to been supplied for us to provide points for that.
I think it's something I'd recommend changing, though, if there is a history, with tree farming, that you don't necessarily do anything every year, but I would say.
You don't have an annual income.
Yeah, but active, I would say every decade, if they could provide something, maybe we don't score it now, but I think that's something we should consider.
Yeah, and I think for what it's worth, as we continue to go through this, this is only the second or third time we've gone through the whole form here, that we need to, just be aware of things like that. And because this is, a working form, it's obviously can always be improved. And a lot of this was done a bit in a vacuum. We did some examples, hypos you'll remember, but.
Because that property, I know for a fact, has been actively managed at least since the 70s.
Yeah.
The farm in general.
Mm-hmm.
So, I think.
Yeah, and so, it could be a change where it says maybe not just selling or growing for the last 2 years, or perhaps documentation that it's been actively farmed or used for timber, the majority of the last 30 or 40 years or something like that.
Possibly a management plan.
Something like that.
If you could provide a management plan that says, okay, in 2020, we're doing something, we did something in 2012.
Sure.
If you could provide some sort of evidence that you were actively engaged in tree farming.
Right.
I think it should be considered.
Right. Yeah, I don't disagree with you. Well, let's table that, but I do think, Marvin, it's a good point, and maybe we should schedule when we're in a little bit more of a less active time, a time to review this and go for suggestions. Currently, based on the criteria, I don't think we can score it, but I think going forward, it's something we can look at. Public visibility of property. And so one is visible from federal, state, or county road, or visibility from public access lands or waterways. And I think, I did not award anything under this, and I want to say, it probably goes back to the application. Did anybody else
Yeah.
have anything else on this?
I looked at the topo and from, it looked like it was, you know, Oconee Station is higher than this, or is Oconee's, I'm looking at, because it would be visible from Oconee Station, which is
Yeah.
public access.
Public access.
Okay,
I'll give it a 3.
That's what I did.
okay. And I may, perhaps on mine, the only reason that I did not is because we didn't have a photograph supplied, which is part of the criteria there.
The topo doesn't actually show the boundaries, but I used other maps, so we've got the
Right.
lake here, which is on Oconee Station, and Oconee Town is on this side, and the contour lines would show that this is visible from Oconee Station.
Okay, okay.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm good with that. Do we want to, Fran, did you say 3 points is what you
Yeah.
did there?
Yeah.
3.
How does the board feel about 3 points as a consensus?
I think that's good.
Okay, let me, let's see. Okay. Okay, and then scenic view from property. If applies, the board may apply points ranging from 1 to 5 for the quality of the scenic view and the public's ability to benefit from the scenic view. And Fran, you actually visited the site, is that right?
Yeah, I give it a 3.
Okay,
Because the mountains are visible from other places.
right, okay. Any other thoughts on that? And there were photos of that in the documentation also. I had given it a 3 also, just based on the photographs. I've been out in that area an awful lot, but I don't know that I've ever stood on this exact property. So.
Yeah, it does have some views.
Okay. Does the group feel comfortable with 3 as a?
Yes.
I think so, yes.
Okay. And then public access. Now, right now, I think the public access is limited until the Parks and South Carolina Parks, Recreation, and Tourism develops a management plan. Then full public access will be available. You know, we can award 5 for limited or 10 for unlimited. I sort of erred towards 5 just because right now it's not a public park, so to speak.
That's what I put,
And-
5.
And so everybody comfortable with that?
Yes.
I said 10 because of, it's destined to be an extension of Oconee Station, which is state.
That's right, maybe a state historic site is Oconee Station? Okay,
Potential to be a 10.
yeah, yeah. So right now it's limited, but could it be unlimited? It's a good question, Richard, and that also kind of raises a point about the application in general. I mean, I think a lot of these properties, you know, are gonna come in and they're not gonna have public access on them, but they're gonna likely, that's gonna be the intention. I don't know.
This is a more unique application in terms of that, because it's kind of that
Yeah,
middle ground right now.
right, okay. So we had several 5s, Richard had a 10. Richard, I do think there's some grounds for that. I don't think that's unreasonable. Ernie and Marvin, what are your thoughts on that one? Did you have it as limited as 5 or unlimited as 10?
Well, I think looking at the present, it's 5.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Speculation is 10.
okay,
No, I lean toward giving it a 5, but we should maybe more narrowly define the definition there for later.
Yeah, I think we should.
Maybe, yeah. Can we do a 7 in the middle between those?
Let's
or is
see.
it, I know, compromise.
under the current system, it's allow only for one category. Again,
Okay,
this is sort of
yes,
that
okay.
check the box.
Okay.
I know it's a little unwieldy. I think the original intention, for what it's worth, was to try and limit subjectivity in the application scoring. So let's, it sounds like the consensus more or less is the 5, but again, Marvin, I think there is some opportunity to improve this. It could be something like, currently has unlimited access, or the board feels confident that it will within the next 6 to 12 months, something
The
like that.
proposal says access will be limited until South Carolina Park Recreation and Tourism develops a management plan, then full public access will be available.
Right, right,
Okay, from my point of view,
right.
using actively farming as a reference, which we gave 0
Right,
currently,
right,
then I stand by 5
yeah.
currently.
Just because we're looking at a current snapshot.
Yeah.
It is, it's right. And those are the 2 areas that we might look at, and I would encourage everybody to, make a note of those, because it would be a good thing to go through and look through these. I think for what it's worth, we need to get through the entire application cycle with the same scoring rubric, just for the fairness of everybody involved. It wouldn't be fair to other applicants or the current applicant to change it. But come next, the end of December, when this scoring period ends, we will have 6 months where we could revise and update this as necessary. So we'll stick with 5 from there. I think that's the consensus, at least under the current rubric on that. The next one is threat of development. Threat of development here, I think the top, the most you can give here is 5, and the one that is most closely aligned is that highest point getter, which is properties within or adjacent to state forest, state park, et cetera. And this being adjacent to Oconee Station, I think would merit that 5-point score there. Any question or comment about that? And then last but not least, this is one of those, really rather straightforward questions. Essentially, how big is the property? Well, it's 53 acres, and so that is that first category, 51 to 250 acres, so that's 5 points as well. And turning sort of that summary page, if I add up everything that we just scored with the adjustments that we made as we went through, that gives us a total for that category of 47 points. Does anybody have a different number there?
You're taking none, 0 for size of protected property, since it's under the 51 acres?
It's actually over, so they would get 5 for that.
Okay. I'll give them 5.
Yeah. So we have 47 points for that category. That, of course, is just the first section of conservation criteria. The second one is the financial criteria. And so we'll look at that next. Let's see here. Bear with me a moment. Okay, and so the financial criteria, basically, this was a little bit interesting to me, and I'll kind of explain my rationale as we went through it. Some of these things are fairly black and white. The first one is funding percentage requested. And if you look at the total amount of funds sought for this, come to the right section here. The total market value for the proposed project is $134,000. The amount of grant requested is $9,567 approximately. Based on the figures, what is the total percentage? It's 7.13%. And so overall, you will see and we will see projects potentially that range everywhere from a landowner who essentially wants you to buy out the fee simple interest in the property and pay 100% or close to 100% of the value of the property, which frankly would be a tough sell for the board just because our funds are limited. More commonly, you might see somebody ask for something in the 30 to 40 or 50% range. I think even those are a heavy lift unless the project is really, really worthwhile, because it just ends up adding up. It's a lot of money. When you see projects like this that are maybe 15% or less, I think from a funding point of view, it's pretty attractive. And the spectrum of 0 to 5 here, I gave it a 4 personally. Anybody else come up with a different number for that?
I gave it a 4.
I think I could go with a 5 being less than 10%. I
Yeah.
mean, if we kind of break it into categories like that.
Yeah.
I mean, but definitely a 4.
Okay. Yeah. Richard, Ernie, how about yourselves? Any
That works.
good with the 4? Ernie, you good with the 4?
I
Okay, I think the 5 also, you could have made an argument for that, Marvin, too. I don't think that's unreasonable. Sounds like 4 is consensus on that. Next one's a little interesting, matching or other monetary contributions from other agencies or groups. And so in 2016, the South Carolina Conservation Bank awarded Natural Land Trust $134,000 to purchase the property for permanent protection for additional Oconee Station State Historic Site. Natural Land Trust is the current owner. And so, on the one hand, Natural Land Trust did go out and apply and get other funds, which is exactly what this sort of gets to. And the idea is that, somebody's not just coming to us for funding, but they've gone to other groups or they've raised money themselves. And so that's positive. On the other hand, and I think this is why this whole application is a little unique for us to wrap our minds around, the property has already been acquired by Natural Land Trust. And so it is currently essentially protected in some way, and there has been grants received. I was sort of on the fence about this, whether to say, hey, great, they got other grants and give them a good score for that, or not give them a score at all, because basically that's already been done. That's almost a transaction that's already closed. So I'm looking for your guys' input on that. How do you view that? Where do you all stand on that?
I was in a similar situation
Yeah.
thinking about this, because it's basically a refund on what they're doing, and that's, I don't know. I was just,
And
And they didn't get any matching funds for this purchase.
Right. I mean, for sort of the fact situation, right?
And the $134,000 that the Natural Land Trust did came from the South Carolina Conservation Bank, is that right?
That's right.
Okay.
Okay. So what scores did you all have for this particular section? Anybody?
I had a 0. based on-
that's where I was going, was a 0.
No additional money for this acquisition.
Yeah, okay, and that's ultimately where I landed too. I think it's tough, because I think you could look at that both ways. I'm a little concerned, though, if we get points for this sort of thing in the future,
Right.
it would open the door for somebody saying, well, hey, we got a grant for a similar project last year or 3 years ago or 5 years ago. You could imagine, for example, somebody who gets a grant for a particular conservation project on their farm that's less than maybe full conservation of the farm, and then they come and say, well, we did get a grant for $30,000 back in 2013, and you say, well, that's fantastic, but I don't know if that gets to the current situation. So
Let's see, so are we talking about conservation practices like tree planting, cost share? Would that
well, I don't
qualify?
I don't think so. I don't think that's the intention. I think the intention is basically, have you raised other funds for this same purpose that you're applying now, which is the conservation of the property?
That was my understanding. I didn't think that just other farm cost share was being considered.
Right, absolutely. Okay. Well, so is the group okay with this one, just given that challenging way to look at it? I mean, I just think it's tough, but I think it is kind of what it is. Is everybody comfortable with the 0 in that category, given what's happened there?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay. Next section is low cost for value received. Now, look at the application. How does the proposal present a unique value and that protects land at a reasonable cost? And both both are checked in the application, that it's available at a low cost per acre, it's available from a willing seller at a reasonable price. And, you know, I think that the challenge here, again, is not that they're requesting too much money. I think they're not requesting much in terms of the overall valuation. But again, you get in this situation where really the property is in sort of a protected status already. And so if we say, you know, when you really talk about value, if our funds were going to be the key to actually conserving this property, but for our funds, this doesn't happen, and you could do it for this amount, I think everybody would say, well, this is a, 5. I mean, if you can conserve the property, but it's sort of hard to justify a high number here just because property is protected. Now, this might help. I think there is some argument to say that this additional funding may help strengthen the conservation going forward, might help propel this across the finish line. But it's not, I don't think, it wouldn't be totally transparent and forthright to say that our donation's imperative for this to be conserved. Does everybody kind of see what I'm saying there? On that one, I hedged a little bit, and I ended up with a 2 on that, just thinking that I wanted to give some value because I do think there is some value here, but I just didn't see that it was as critical as some other that we could give. The other financial benefit section here, no matching funds or in-kind services have been applied or received. So I didn't give any score for that. It wasn't submitted in the application. Anybody else have a different viewpoint on the other financial benefit? Okay, so we didn't award any points under that. Final section there is the other incentives, and then it says, please describe any other financial advantage for the proposed conservation project, which helps ensure the project represents a good use of limited OCCB funds or provides a good return on investment. And then basically says, project leverages grant funding award in 2016 by the State Conservation Bank for this project. And again, I mean, this sort of ties back into what we talked about before, and you know, and I just think it's tricky when you got, this was a grant that was given, or at least awarded in 2016. The property's actually already closed and been acquired. Did anybody have a, thought scoring on that?
I think because of some of the other categories are so low. And we all admit that this property is valuable. I give it a 5.
Okay. Anybody else have a different perspective on that? I again sort of just struggled with the weighing those two, and I just gave it a 2 here. I wanted to give something for the value there without going too high, but I think you could argue it both ways.
So that being said, could we consider possibly a 3?
Yeah, I think that's reasonable. Can everybody live with that? A 3 in that category? Okay.
I think if I had to argue, I could justify that, yeah.
Sorry, I'm talking like a lawyer here.
No,
Everything's
I think that's the
Defend your
legitimate
decision.
point. We need to be able to defend.
And I think the property is scoring pretty well, even though it doesn't score very good down here with requests that we have at this time anyway. It's
Right.
gonna score pretty high.
Right.
So I don't.
So if we add that first level of 47, okay, plus the next 9 there, that gives us a total of 56, unless my math is off there. And final comments down there, I wrote, this is a fantastic property, but it's already protected, and that's just thus the struggle. Now, on the other hand, I don't think they're asking for an enormous amount of funds. Before we get to any other discussion, Chris, you want to provide any background or further information on just what the funds here would be used for, or how they might just help in some regard with regard to the property? Anything else you think the board should consider, I think?
Sure, I can see on the agenda is no public comment.
Can we not have any public comment?
Our, so you got 56 points for the, okay, so we just need a motion and a vote and everything.
For that score?
this to be.
Okay, okay. Okay, well, with that said, thank you, Katie. Do I hear a motion to give the project a score of 56 points?
So moved.
Do I hear a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Seeing none, okay, so the project will get 56 points there.
Now, if you're the chairman, so
Mhm.
if you want him to speak, that's fine. That's not a problem. It's up to you.
Okay, are you all comfortable with that, hearing from Chris just a little bit? Chris, are you comfortable with that? Okay,
And if
yep.
you'll just come up to the podium and just state your name, just for the record, and where you're from.
Well, I wasn't prepared for all this.
We'll do a song and dance next.
Okay, I might have to charge you for that. Actually, my name is Chris Starker. I'm a land conservation project manager over at Upstate Forever. And if you don't mind, I'd like to just back up. And I have a few comments as part about the agricultural entity aspect of it. I think that is something that y'all should consider changing. Not in light of this project, but because I do believe that timber is an active management, ag management, and that those are very long-term. And I think in that case, a timber management plan would be a great way to do that. Now, as far as actively farming, if you had crops or grazing, I don't think if you're not using it for those things, I think those are more apparent. But if you've got a TMS, I think those are clear indications that you have an agricultural, and that's how I feel about it as well. I don't think this family is using this for any agricultural land. I think it may have agricultural value, and I think it's where prime soils would come in. I think those are all good indicators for that. So just my 2 cents on that. The part about the public accessibility, I think I agree with you guys there. There is some intent there. My opinion, though, especially for Oconee County, you've got a lot of forest land up here, and forest land is public access, but is very saleable. So to me, that's public land that has some sensitivity, and that's where I would probably give higher scores. Not in this case here. You have a private land, and this is basically arguing against my application. I know that, but this is sort of how I see it in Oconee County. You've got forest lands that could be sold, but if there was an opportunity to purchase that and keep it into public access, you have public access land that remains public access. And that might be kind of an extreme case, but that's just one way I see that. So just to give you an alternative view. And as far as some of these matching funds, I will be a little critical of that. And you've already given it a score. I'm not going to argue with it. But that it's sometimes, and I work at a nonprofit. I've been chasing grant funding for 10 years. It's hard to get matching funds if you don't already have the funds. So a lot of times it helps to have the funding. Yeah, we were awarded the funds in 2016 so that you can seek other funds. A lot of times if funding is pending in this application or funding is pending in that application, everybody's sort of waiting. It's just a sort of a standoff. And then sometimes you don't get any funding. So when the Conservation Banks gives us whatever the funding was, I didn't write it down, that for us is this huge green light, the flag's out there, take off, it should help you get any other funding you need. So just my 2 cents on a few of the topics y'all brought up. I appreciate it being here. It's the first time I've seen a scoring, and it helps me really understand how you think through this process. And I've got an application on my desk right now that I'm working on, so I'm going to go back and make a bunch of revisions. As far as the money that we've requested for this project, it covers an endowment. And that endowment pays for a land trust, in this case, Upstate Forever. But if for some reason, just theoretically, Upstate Forever is not around in 5 years or 50 years or even 500 years, hard to imagine that Upstate Forever would be around 500 years, but that's the plan. There is a land trust. This land would be protected in perpetuity. So 50, 500 years from now, a land trust has to monitor this project forever, and that will cost money. So the money that we've requested goes into that endowment. It generates funds to pay for staff time, travel time, Hey, that's money we've used, and we seem to be in litigation in some way, shape, or form all the time with some landowner who's violated the terms of the conservation easement, or an adjacent landowner who's violated the terms of the conservation trespass or what have you, and allows us to have the insurance and the legal funds to fight that, to ensure that those conservation values are maintained. So it's not always the landowner, but sometimes outside the property, forces that come in. And as we're seeing now, as we see biodiversity changes, a little bit of variations in the weather and climate, things are invasive species removal. These things are costing money. In some cases, we're going in and trying to do stream restorations because of high-intensity rainflows are creating erosion on stream corridors. Variety of things. The endowment gives us the funding to actually do those projects. We could use the endowment as some funding to make those projects happen. But in essence, the endowment allows us to protect those conservation values. Without it, we cannot ensure protection of those conservation values. In this case, the conservation values being the public access, the recreation potential, the water quality improvements, the protection, things that were laid out in those applications. They're there now, but the endowment is an investment in the future. Also, I'm not entirely sure that as it's laid out in the application, without the endowment, that the parks will accept the land, and that the management plan will be put in place. That is not an assurity. So that kind of reflects back on some of the other 2 cents I've added. Natureland Trust does own it. I don't think they're going to give it up. It is protected, but it may affect some of the public access, or at least the short-term vision for that. It may just take longer. We may have to circumvent that. But with an endowment in place, my guess is that this land would be handed over to the parks this fall. Well, it is August already. Maybe winter. But, before Phil Gaines leaves. That's the plan.
Is the endowment line itemed specifically for this site, or is it just a general fund?
Good question.
Wow, that is a great question, and my answer is both. It is a line item specifically for this project. In order for us to accept the conservation easement, we have to receive this endowment. Right. So Natureland Trust owns it. In order for us to hold the conservation easement on it, we have to have the endowment. But the endowment itself is a general fund. Okay. Each project is contributing to that pool. The endowment generates funding to manage all the projects as a whole, because we really don't know where we will have issues in the future. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes sense.
But this is calculated specifically for this project.
Okay.
Does the Natureland Trust have other money that they can put into it?
Do they have other money? Typically, no. However, I'm not entirely comfortable speaking on behalf of Natureland Trust on that, whether they do or not. In addition, they would be better able to explain yes or no one way or the other, and how they manage that. So I do beg your pardon. My guess is that the Natureland Trust does not have it in their budget or in some mechanism where they can fund endowments. I don't know if that makes sense. It doesn't entirely make sense to me at all. But I'm not entirely sure about the answer to that question, but I don't think so. I do know that Natureland Trust is chasing a lot of projects. Development is on the upswing, and they are working really hard to protect lands that are out there. And my knee-jerk reaction is no, but I would really prefer someone from Natureland Trust to answer that.
Is it for us to contribute to an endowment? Is that not legal or proper in our bylaws to do that instead of into a property conservation?
Yeah, I would have to look at the specific language of the statute again, but suffice to say, basically, the statute says, and this is just generally speaking, and the specifics are actually in the statute, generally says that the funds have to be used for the conservation of lands and a fee simple purchase or in a conservation easement. And so basically, Natural Land Trust here is seeking to enter a conservation easement with Upstate Forever. So I think likely that's true. Before we actually discuss, granting of specific awards or what have you based on the score, we should vet that out and talk about that a little more. And we'll talk about what's the proper timing for discussing the actual monetary award here in just a moment. But prior to that, does anybody else have any other questions or comment for Mr. Starker?
When I talk with people about this funding letter, I try to explain what we do and what the money accomplishes, and a couple of points that you've brought up are going to be helpful. The thing about stream restoration, I was just reading up on some of this recently. That is really important and is not cheap, and I was pulling exotics this morning out of my garden. I can't walk out of my backyard, and I worked with DNR after I retired from teaching and spent probably 80% of my time murdering exotics. So I know about the money so you've given me some real good ideas to justify explaining to the public and defending this.
And I'll actually to say that Upstate Forever is nationally accredited. So we are accredited by the National Land Trust Association. And as part of that, we're obligated to collect an endowment. So it is I'm glad you mentioned that, Shay, that funds must be used for fee simple or for conservation easement. It is part of the conservation easement. It is when we sit down at the closing table, it is one of the forms that we have. It is part of that process. So if we were not nationally accredited, we could probably waive that. Or probably waive a lot of things. Right. But we wouldn't be who we are.
Right.
And you said that South Carolina Parks would not accept it without the endowment?
It might influence that. I will say that. I don't know what the outcomes of that would be. I think moving into this, there were a lot of assumptions. For example, this is a no-brainer. It expands on Oconee Station, so why wouldn't it happen? I would hesitate to say that it wouldn't be. In this case, you have an expansion of a park. The staff is already there. You're not establishing a new park. And when you have that, then you have to have new management, you have to hire new staff, and that becomes budgetary. And that's much harder for the state parks to accomplish. In this case, you simply have an expansion of the park. And I think that goes over a lot more easily. For example, we have some expansions happening in Paris Mountain State Park as well, because they don't have to hire new staff. It might be an additional management burden for existing staff, but it's typically something they can build in. So I would hesitate to say that it wouldn't happen, but it could cause some hurdles, and we know how slow the government is on that as it is. So does that make sense?
And yeah. South Carolina parks have to sustain themselves.
Yes.
So that's another budgetary issue, like you said, that would help them.
And the process of just donating land to the state in itself is a whole other bunch of red tape and hurdles.
You don't have any idea of what the Parks Department plans to do with it? Whether they intend to put in a fee or...
I don't know. That's entirely in their court.
That
would be a part of their management plan and how they do that. And my guess it would be revised periodically like any other management plan. But I'm not a part of that. They have had input and contributed to the development of the conservation easement language. So they've been at the table. But as far as how they plan to manage, that's up to them entirely.
So if I understand correctly, and thank you for your comments, if I understand correctly, those will be taken into consideration, and most likely we will have further discussion before any decision is made. Is that correct?
Well,
Well, once we give the money away, it's gone. We don't have any more input after that.
Well, to your point, Ernie, as far as, we've given this project a score today, as far as actually awarding a grant or not, probably the right way to look at this is we have, I think, at least one more application from the beginning part of this year. Prudent thing may be to do is to score that also before we award funds for this cycle. Because to some degree, whether, we want to look at it like this or not, it is a bit of a comparative analysis. If you have 9 projects and the one that scores the lowest in and of itself may look great, but if it compared to the other 8, it's the worst of the bunch, your funds might be directed in one place versus the other. And so the scoring undoubtedly should take place today and did. As far as the actual financial award and such, I think that's something I wanted to talk to you about after our comment session with Chris. Chris, you have any other final comments before we move forward?
No, I don't. No, thanks. But I appreciate you giving me an opportunity to.
Thank you.
Thank you for speaking
Absolutely.
with
Thank
us.
you, Chris. We appreciate it. That's some good insight there, I think, for us all to consider. Okay, so with that said, to kind of pivot here, move forward a little bit, without advancing to the next topic, you all will see the next topic on the agenda is the discussion regarding the Moore property. And the Moore property, I think we have an active application on that. We haven't scored that yet. I believe, Katie, tell me if I'm wrong, I think that's the only other application we have from the application cycle between January 1 and July 31. I think we had another statement of interest potentially.
Lyles.
The Lyles and
Do we have a full application from the Moore property?
I don't,
Because
that's a great
I was like,
question.
I didn't see it in the packet, but.
No, the more property
What's
came
that?
in May the 10th.
Yeah, Jason, do you have a comment? I think Jason has been working with the Moore family. If you'll introduce yourself, Jason.
Yes, I'm Jason Davis. I'm currently work at the NRCS and work with the Oconee County Soil and Water Conservation District. And part of our work with the Moore property is just getting it ready for application in the ASAP process. And where she's at now is kind of in the lingo, kind of waiting for a deadline. Our deadline for ASAP applications comes in November, so we won't know anything if she is actually approved through ASAP to get a grant for an easement until after they go make the application and then go through the State Conservation Bank Board to see how they award funds. So at this point in time, she's really not on the same lap per se
Sure.
as the previous property y'all discussed, but we're actively working with her, trying to get her to that point.
Okay. Okay, so it sounds like that for all of our intents and purposes is a bit on hold until that would go through, and if that goes through, potentially you all would submit a full application, is that right?
Correct, and it would not be for the whole matching fund for the cost share of the whole property, but, for other fees and, requirements like a title search, appraisal.
Sure.
Closing costs and such like that.
Okay.
Is more like in the line of what she's working for.
Sure.
Or looking for y'all. And, to speak to the importance of the Oconee County Conservation Bank Board, is a very small minority in South Carolina of counties that even have a conservation bank board. And, what y'all are doing to help out smaller landowners to help them, do some conservation on their property is very important. And, we're just trying to work with y'all and see if we can help people get lined up and put people together for that purpose.
Sure. Thanks, Jason. That's helpful because that gives us some guidance on the Moore property and not much there really to discuss. And without trying to get us all out of sync on the agenda here. We did also get a statement of interest from the Lyles, the estate of William Lyles, and that's another one that Upstate Forever's on. And technically, this got presented in June, so that was within our first 6 months of the year time frame. Chris, can you speak at all to that with regard to the Lyles, whether, I know we just have a statement of interest for them. Technically, we have to give you the go-ahead to submit a full application, but assuming that was done, would this be the kind of project that would be able to submit a full application in the relatively near future?
Yes.
Okay.
Actually, we can talk after this, would be great. This is also an ASEP program,
Okay.
project that we'll be submitting. And we, Upstate
ASAP.
is the Agricultural Conservation Easement Program
Okay.
through the NRCS.
Okay.
So actually, Jason could probably tell you more about it than I can. Upstate Forever has been approved to work through this program. We actually just started, and it's a very new process for me and pretty much everybody. I actually have a meeting with Heather Ramsey this week to actually talk about how this works, because it's, as you can imagine, federal program with lots of forms, strict deadlines. And we're trying to work this into how we help landowners protect their farms. And in this case, great project, this one, the Lyles Estate, this is going, and you guys, this is a great place where matches will come together, because this would be 50% funded by ASAP. And then we're seeking 25% from Oconee County Conservation Bank, and another 25% is going to be donated. And that's how the ASAP program works. You have to have the 50% match. For this property, I'm still working on those exact timelines, because I'm not really sure how the ASAP process works. I don't, and it sounds like I would be approved if I have everything applied by November. Then I wouldn't be approved until next year. So submitting, is that right? That's correct. Right. So even if I had a full application for you now and you awarded it, I wouldn't be able to use those funds for a while, and I'm not even sure I would be awarded the ASAP. So
Yeah.
We're still wrapping our head about how to make these things work. And again, it's these timelines. I mean, the conservation banks on a 6-month cycle. The state bank, and then you got the Oconee Conservation Bank, and everybody's got their different cycles. And trying to time that is
Tricky.
hard.
Yeah.
Same issue we had with Oconee Town. But in this case, we have, I think it was 250 acres or so. Y'all have the statement just in front of you.
155.
155.
150, all right, I'm just dreaming bigger.
Good.
There must be 100 acres next to it I want to add. Yeah, there's a lot. But mostly part of this is in timberland, and part of this is in agricultural, some grazing out there. Some of it's actually small bits in crop, but we're talking Whetstone community here. We're feeding into the Chattooga River. And that area, I don't get up in there very often, but when I do, I'm always grateful to be there. Gorgeous, gorgeous part of the county. The family, this is, it's William Lyles, and he has 2 sisters. The sisters don't want any part of the property. They want to sell it outright, so this is the only way to protect this land. Otherwise, it will be divided, and that's the fate of it. So we either protect it or we don't. So I don't know if you have any other questions about it, but that's.
I think that's probably sufficient for now, just where we are. I wanted to get an idea in terms of doing any sort of monetary, decisions, trying to figure out the timing, the best timing for that. And it sounds like both of these projects are a little bit on a little bit of a wait and see. Certainly, you all could submit applications if you would like to on these. I think the only it would just be important to describe in there that this is contingent on us getting these ASAP grants, because obviously any award, if the application says, well, the intention is to get a grant of this amount from ASAP, and that doesn't occur, well, it would change the logic on our side. So I think the statute would allow us to sort of conditionally give an award, which would essentially say, we think this is a worthwhile project. We give a grant for X, but it's conditioned on you doing A, B, and C first. And so that may be something that we look at, and that might help you all in your work with some of these other organizations too.
Can I just give you a brief rundown of the
Sure.
process?
Sure.
Once they submit an application for ASAP, the deadline will be November, about 15th, middle of November. And then that will go to the State Conservation Bank Board. They'll rank them, make their presentations to that board and see which ones that they're going to be interested in funding. And that's in a statewide pool. And once they get all those ranked and see which ones they're going to fund, then they'll, go through the process of issuing the funding for those. And it usually ends up being springtime, May, before, we know if that gets the actual award. So,
Right.
Just trying to get everything is, like you said, it's hard to get, it's kind of like getting credit. It's hard to get credit without having any credit, but you can't get credit because you ain't got credit.
Right.
To get funding, you need somebody to have commitment, and that commitment needs, everybody needs to know that there's more than one person going to pay the bill for it.
Right.
So that's kind of where trying to get everybody lined up and timed out for that comes into play, and why that's so important to, kind of be in communication and try to get all these folks done, because you're competing against a statewide pool in the ASAP
Right.
process. So.
Shay, can we make, or can we pocket funds for a given time contingent on these situations? Say that, we will, put $10,000 in, we'll designate $10,000 for a given project if it can be, those matching funds come through in the next 18 months. Or
It's almost like a
12.
pre-approval.
Pre-approval.
I think we would have to, Marvin, at that point, I think we could do it, but I think they'd have to submit a full application based on those contingencies. We could make an award that was conditional, and they would have to do these things, and we likely would have to produce, instead of them getting a check of an award or something, we'd have to go to the Oconee County Council and say, this is what we've approved. It's a monetary gift, but they would only get it if A, B, and C are completed. If it doesn't happen with the time frame expires, I don't think there's any reason why we can't do that. And that's fairly typical in the grant-making process. You see things like that. So, I don't think there's any reason we couldn't do that. I would encourage you all to go ahead and submit your applications if you feel confident that that's where it is heading. I'll leave that to you guys. I don't want you to waste your time either. But if you feel like there's a strong likelihood that you're going to advance towards the ASIP grants, and you feel like there's a fair likelihood that that's going to move forward, then we certainly could go through the application process with those properties, and we could make it conditional, even if you're not through the ASAP process, but we say this is a great project, we'd be willing to give you X as a grant if you do get the ASAP funding no later than X date, and that might help you in your ASAP process also.
Yeah, we try to kind of help them out in that process and whittle it down to see, you get all kinds of applications, and just like on Miss Moore's property, we can go ahead and look at the soil types, and, for Lyle's property as well, we can look and see, go ahead and give them an idea of whether they really actually stand a chance of getting funded. And then, so when we bring something that we feel like there's a pretty good chance that they would get funding for.
Right.
So,
Right, okay. Okay, well, that's all really good information. Jumping back to kind of just get, yes, Katie?
If y'all want them to submit an application, we need a motion.
Right, and I think for the Moore property, if I'm not mistaken, did we not already approve their statement of interest to submit an application?
Yes, I'm talking about Lyle's.
Lyle's, okay, yeah, and that is correct.
Yeah, we did that last meeting.
That's what I thought,
Yes,
okay.
June the 5th.
And with regard to the State of William Lyle's property, do I hear a motion that they submit a full application?
I so move.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Seeing none opposed, that passes. So Chris, by all means, if you guys want to complete and submit that, and make any notes necessary about, what the process is and what contingencies are, and we'll, I think we can do that. Okay, and then before moving on to some of our last couple things, we got a couple more things to get through. In terms of, again, doing the monetary award, while there's a temptation, since we've scored this, to say, let's go ahead and make some award, I just wonder if the right thing to do is to wait till later in the cycle till we have the full list of projects that we want to actually provide grants to. Does anybody have a different viewpoint on that, or thoughts or discussion on that?
Well, our cycle ends like the end of the year, so this is the only full one besides the one we did earlier the last time.
So the only, the statement of interest we received were actually, both of these were received before the end of that 6-month cycle. So the process started then. I think those two are ones we could look at.
Right.
Beyond that, if we were able to rank and score those and allocate funds based on those, I think that would basically be it for this cycle. You know, I realize that it may not change the math a lot for the board. Any thoughts or questions on that from anybody else on the board?
Well, I have a thought. Since the Natural Land Trust is not likely to give up the property adjacent to Oconee Station very soon, we have a little time to wait for that.
Yeah, that could be true. Chris, is there any significant time sensitivity to that project we should be aware of, as far as, does it, you know, if it's later in this fall or you know, early winter before we actually are in a position where we move forward to award the grant, does it impact the project in any meaningful way?
That's potential. I will say potentially. I don't know. We do know that Phil Gaines, who's the State Parks Director, is retiring, and I believe, I mean, he keeps putting that off. That was supposed to be back in March, April, May, June. Now it's August. So we anticipate Phil Gaines to retire at any moment now. And when he does, and a new director is put in place, acquisition of lands could, we just don't know what the fate of those are. My guess is postponement. It may take longer to get transfer of lands. That's, and I don't know if that's being optimistic or pessimistic, or neither, or just realistic. I would hesitate to say that they would never happen. I would hesitate to say that for some reason state parks don't want more lands, especially when you don't have to create, as mentioned before, new staffs and new management plans for these new parks when you're just expanding on existing ones. So my guess is it's probably okay. I'm just hesitant to give false hope, but I'm also hesitant to,
Right.
blow the bugle. So
I mean, since the state of South Carolina is so predictable.
exactly. There has been this sense of urgency coming from Phil Gaines himself to get these done before he retires, and he's kind of been hanging on. So we're all trying, and of course this is on your timeline, so there's nothing we can do about that. And I'm not trying to put that on you at all, no burden on you at all, but that's just from our perspective and speaking with Phil Gaines, this is what we've sort of been instructed, get them done.
If you weren't awarded the full amount, would that make a bigger effect on that issue, or?
You mean as in the alternative being partially awarded?
Yeah, if it was partially awarded, would that make any effect on the land acquisition for the state PRT?
I have not really considered that option. I do know that without the endowment, there would be everyone would have to take a step back to find the missing funds.
Okay.
It's sort of like if you were putting together a puzzle and you couldn't find all the pieces, you would stop and you'd look for them.
Right.
Do the best you can to find them and put them in place. How long that takes or where that funding comes from, I don't have those answers.
Okay.
But, so the answer, I believe that is yes. Yes.
Well, I think it would depend on the percentage.
That too,
If
exactly.
it was almost there, they would take it.
Right.
If it was only half, they would not take it.
Yeah, and we don't, if there's a very small percentage, we could look at potentially finding a grant somewhere. I mean, absolutely. I mean, those are the steps that we have to do that. Once we know what we're dealing with, we would step back and we could apply for a grant. That process, as you know, could take 6 months or so. You never know. And, yeah, we could definitely.
All right, well, again, in the sake of time, and we do have some other things that we still have to get through. In terms of just actually, thank you, Chris, getting the awarding these funds today or waiting. I mean, I really think you could kind of argue this either way. It doesn't look like for the application cycle, we're going to be inundated with a lot more applications anyway. We sort of know it's 2 at the max. And those 2 may even be conditional, it appears. So it doesn't look like this is a major issue. I don't know that there's a compelling reason to make them wait. I could see in the future that we may need to develop a process by which we try and do all of that awarding on one day. In this particular cycle, I don't know that it makes a huge degree of difference. Last cycle, we did talk about how important that was, anticipating one day we may get more applications, and I think we will, frankly, as time goes on. But right now, I think this is the one before us, and we only have other 2 potentials. What are the thoughts in terms of to score this now or to wait till later in the cycle? Any other thoughts or opinions?
Mark, do you have any hesitation from a legal standpoint? We mentioned something since it had already been awarded.
Yeah.
The other funds that it actually falls. That's my only. I think we're good, but I just.
Well, no, I don't think so, because from the legal point of view, and not to get overly technical, even though Natural Land Trust owns this property, and they are what you might call a conservation-friendly owner, okay? It'd be like if you knew I own 100 acres and you say, oh, Shay, he's a tree hugger, he's never going to put a mall on that property, okay? Well, Natural Land Trust is an organization. As an organization, they're conservation-friendly, but they do not have a conservation easement on the property. Conservation easement, what they're looking for here is funds that enter this easement, and when they do that, they basically lock hands with Upstate Forever, and Upstate Forever has a legal obligation to make sure that's protected. So there is value in that. I think that the challenge we're kind of wrapping our heads around before is Natural Land Trust was awarded funds and went through a process just to acquire the property, okay? And so they did that, which is great. Now they're looking for a little bit of extra help to enter that agreement with Upstate Forever to sort of protect it long term. So I think it fits within the statute pretty clearly. Again, I don't have it in front of me, but that's my recollection. So I don't think we're in any bad ground there. So I don't see an issue there, but I do think there's a legitimate question as to whether you score it now or later. I haven't heard from Chris, and just thinking about the other applications, I'm kind of leaning more maybe it's better just to go ahead and score this today or actually do an award today. Does anybody have any opinion on that?
How much is the Lyles property asking for?
Well, we only have a statement of interest at this time, so we don't actually have the figures in front of us for that one or the Moore property. I don't know if there's any, probably at this point would be a little premature to ask for that since we don't have an application on it.
I would lean more toward awarding today, but I will go with the flow.
Ernie, you have any thoughts on it?
Well, my thought is it seems like the urgency is based upon the possibility of the extension to adjoin the state park, which is based upon evidently what I'm presuming is word of mouth from the director of the state parks, and correct me if I'm wrong, has alluded to the fact that with the stroke of his pen that it would take place. Now, I'm curious, and I know that that cannot be answered at this point. Truthfully, is that going to be a legislative process, if you will? Does the retiring park director have the authority to do that? I mean, those are questions, and in my mind, that's the sense of urgency at this point. So that's my comment.
Okay. Katie, what is our next meeting date? Do you have that in front of you?
October the 9th.
October the 9th. Okay. Any thoughts or opinion on whether to score this today or just to table it to a period later in the year? It could be the very next meeting. It could be thereafter. I'm beginning to wonder, though, what we'll accomplish by waiting, to be honest.
Yeah,
Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
Yeah, you wanted to compare it with the other properties that were.
We do, and that's true, which we don't have in front of us.
Anticipate having the next property by October, which would be,
And I know with the change of the guard at the PRT, that's,
Yeah.
it'll push them back, and if this is, this is really an important historical site, and I think this is very much worth preserving and giving that money to in order to make this process go a little quicker, because I know this whole thing has taken years and years to do, and if we contribute to the slowness of that's
that's a
not
good
gonna,
point.
right.
not gonna be any better for the project as a whole, and that means if we get this project quicker, that means that the state park can put together a plan quicker and help out more with this site, and I think.
So looking at it from a different angle, if you
Right,
will, so
right.
realistically, if we approve it today, and for whatever reason, I mean, immediately it does not become part of the state park, I mean, truthfully, that's nothing lost other than the hope that it becomes a part of the park at some point. Is
And it'll
that
still be
correct?
under
I mean,
conservation easement, and it,
I mean, is
the
that,
this
Yeah.
historic value and the land value for that is worth conserving.
so looking at it from that point, I have absolutely no opposition.
Do I hear a motion to actually make a determination of the funds awarded today at today's meeting?
The fund amount is 70.
95.
It would be 9,500 now. Now, subsequent to this motion, somebody could make a motion of that full amount or some lesser amount. There's not any obligation that awards made at a full amount. My motion is just is there a motion to actually make that determination today?
I motion that we approve the award amount today for the Oconee Town site project.
Okay, and are you Jennifer, also going to stipulating a certain amount, or do you just want to?
I think we need to discuss. So
Okay,
I
certain
think-
amount. Okay. Well, I'll second Jennifer's motion to actually make that determination. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed to that? Okay. So as far as the actual amount, we will go ahead and make that determination today. Then I appreciate your patience in figuring that out. Obviously, we're still working through developing this process. The total amount requested under this application was in the $9,000 range. Let me get the exact figure before I speak out of turn.
If the ASEP award is not until November the 15th, and knowing government and knowing my personal life, there's not a whole lot comes to fruition after Thanksgiving. So
Right.
you've got about 10 days in there, so the likelihood of there being a competing project in this cycle, I think, is extremely low.
Right.
And if that amount, if we're not funding the full amount, we're not really giving the project
What it needs.
go ahead. I see no reason not to award the full amount requested.
Yeah.
I sort of tend to agree. I'm
agree.
trying to figure out how to do a percentage.
Yeah, because if you did it as a percentage of, like, if you used the score as a percentage of what the total, it would be pretty low, and it would be half of that. But since this is a very public, potentially a very public piece of land, I think that we should do the whole amount.
the score, correct me if I'm wrong, I think the score is to help rank
Right.
projects, not necessarily
Right.
Correct.
dollar amount.
That's correct. That's
Yeah.
exactly right. And it's for that comparative analysis. We're just not in a cycle where we've got 6 or 8 to 10 projects.
Yeah.
And one day, maybe that will happen. I'm hopeful it will. Right now, we have projects trickling in. I think these are good projects we're getting.
Yes.
We just don't have a ton of them. I think, personal opinion is, given the amount requested and the importance of the project, notwithstanding some of the shortcomings we talked about, I think really it's more than worthwhile. It will help bring this to the finish line, and this is an incredible project for the county, and one that the Oconee County Conservation Bank really, I think, could be proud of participating in. So with that said, a fair amount of support for making the grant at that full amount of $9,567.33. Do I hear a motion to approve the award in that amount?
So moved.
I second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Seeing none opposed, that will pass.
Mr. Harry,
Yes.
does that need to go to full council?
Yeah, it does, and so I need to,
Okay.
I'll have to go and make essentially a recommendation, and then they tend to accept, but that's their prerogative. So that's the final step in it. And if you just want to get with me on that, when the next time I can get on their agenda,
Do we need to make a motion to send it to full council?
I don't think we have in the past. I think basically it is just at this point, and we have to arrange that. I mean, we've taken it as far as we can, and at this point, I have to recommend it to them. Okay? And then we'll see what they say. One thing I do think, just for clarification's sake, and Chris, and just for the board to know, in the past, when we've made a few of the grants we have, when we're just, baby steps learning this process, basically, all the grants we make are conditional to some degree. I mean, they're basically conditional on the project being completed. Mm-hmm. And so it, as you would imagine, would not necessarily be good business practice if you had a landowner who came in here with Chris or with Jason or anybody else with the best intentions, and they have a great project, and so let's say you write them a check for $50,000 to conserve this farm. Well, you write them a check for $50,000, and then 2 months down the road, they say, you know what, changed my mind, we're not going to do it. Or, God forbid, they pass away, and all of a sudden their kids are in charge and they don't want to do it. You don't want to be in a position as a board where you've already given the money away. And so suffice to say that there are some blueprints for other ways that boards do this, but suffice to say the award would be granted in a situation like this, and when Oconee County does this, we'll have to work with all landowners, not just natural land trusts in this situation, just that when this transaction closes, so when they enter the conservation easement with Upstate Forever, we would the actual check would be cut at that time. So they would know it's been awarded, but there's a contingency. Chris, that's fairly customary, I'm sure, from what you guys see on your end.
Absolutely not.
Yeah.
It's enough they come in installments.
Yeah. And just so everybody's aware of that, and when I speak to Oconee County Council, I'll make that clear too.
I have 2 extra comments. One is that the scoring sheet is our own device, isn't it?
That is correct, yep.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So we can change it.
Absolutely,
Yeah.
yep, absolutely.
And we don't have to go by it strictly.
Right.
Well, so we have to go by it until it is changed officially, yeah. But we did develop it, it's based on the State Conservation Bank Board's criteria. We've kind of narrowed it for Oconee County purposes, but it could be adjusted. There were points brought up today where there's some room for improvement, absolutely. And I'm certainly open to that. I think maybe in the new year or January, February, that would be a good thing to look at. Just kind of looking at a lot of procedural issues. The application, let's look again at, when are we going to take applications? When are we going to score them? And I can talk at that time, I think it's a little premature, through some of my experience with some other organizations that do grants, what they do, how they do it. When you're just getting started, it's kind of hard to think of these things in abstract. I think these processes are really helpful because it lets us learn, what's working and maybe what won't work as well.
My second comment is strike while the iron is hot.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Totally agree.
We don't
Totally.
know
Yeah.
what's going to happen next.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right.
Land conservation.
That's exactly right. Okay, so in the essence of trying to move forward, I think we've got just a couple more things, and then we'll be able to move on. And Chris, feel free to communicate to Natural Land Trust our action today. Technically, Oconee County Council does have to approve the recommendation. They tend to look upon our recommendations favorably in the past, but it's up to them technically at this point. So I'll be working with Katie to get the date of the next meeting I can get in front of, and usually they put me as close to the top of the agenda as I can, because usually it takes all of 30 seconds for, I'm just a little peon. They say hi and they just shoo away.
We should note that there is a new council chairman because Etta is retiring.
Right, yeah, that's right. There was that election, and so there's some changes to council, that's correct. Okay, the only other two things I've got, we had a discussion regarding types of accounts available to generate interest. I forget who was working on that.
Did you want these letters that we did to the county council?
I had thought Katie had already gotten those. Do you have an extra? Do you have more?
Yeah, I do.
Okay, yeah. It looks like there's. Thanks, Katie. Did anybody do any further research on the accounts available to generate interest? I know Frank Abels was working on that to some degree.
I've been gone so much since our last meeting.
Sure.
I have not taken care of that, but
Okay.
I plan to meet with,
Okay.
we should have that before the next meeting.
Okay, let's look to that. If you will help with that, Marvin, that would be great. Try and figure out what we can do with some of these funds that we were retaining. We already talked about the new business in terms of the statement of interest from the William Lyles estate and recommended that they submit a full application. And then lastly, under new business, thank you to Katie for bringing it to my attention. But when the grant was accepted from Duke Energy in November 2016, it was a grant of $618,000, part of that was for us to submit a report in 2 years stating about essentially what has been done, what we are doing. I am happy to team up with someone on that. Our activities have not been so extensive. I think it's going to be incredibly difficult, but we do actually need to submit that to them by October, so we do need to get working on that. Is anybody willing to sort of help put that together for me? I think this would basically be in the form of a letter and some exhibits attached to the letter to talk about the grants that have been awarded and what we've done, for example, today and things of that nature.
I can work with Katie if we can put that together.
Katie, are you willing to help us out on that?
Yeah,
If-
absolutely.
Okay.
I don't know. I'm willing to do it. I just need your direction and guidance.
All righty, very good, very good. All righty, so Jennifer and I will work on that. Katie, do you want that in a motion with that?
Yeah, I think that'd probably be the best.
All right. Does anybody move that Jennifer and I work on this report to submit to Duke? Do I hear a second?
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Seeing none opposed, that will pass.
Seconded? I'm sorry. Who seconded?
Marvin.
Okay.
When this is much more work than anticipated, Marvin, we're going to look at the minutes and come back to you. How dare you? All righty, well, I thank everybody for their patience. I know that's a lot to get through in one meeting, but I think we're making some good ground here. I'm excited about that project. I think it's phenomenal. It's one of the reasons we do this stuff. And I'm excited for the opportunity to improve the process. I mean, it is a process, so we're not perfect, but I think you all can see now that we're actually doing something, we're
Right.
making progress, and going forward, I think we just have room for improvement. So appreciate everybody's time and contribution, and not just time, but also just your perspective on this, your critical thought, and just actually looking at this, trying to improve it. That's what's going to make it better long term. So thanks to everybody for that. Thank you for Chris and Jason for coming and speaking, and Katie, as always, for your help. We could not do it without you. All right. With that said, we'll adjourn the meeting. Do I need to have a motion to adjourn it?
Motion to adjourn.
Do I hear a second?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.